The following conversation features author-educator Marsha Sinetar talking with Brother Paul Quinnen, a Trappist monk and a poet, about silence and solitude in the creative life. Paul Quinnen is the author of Laughter My Purgatory, Monkswear, and the editor of a collection called Monkscript to Surprising Saints, published by Fons Vitae.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Marsha Sinetar again, and I'm so happy to be welcoming a friend, distant friend, Brother Paul Quinnen. He's a wonderful poet and has been a Trappist monk living at the Abbey of Gethsemane since 1958. And we're going to talk today about many different things related to the contemplative heart posture that I keep hammering home about. Welcome, Paul.
Hello, thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And I just want to say before we get started that your last book of poetry, Monkswear, is one of my favorite books of verse, and I open it very often and kind of meditate to some of the things you write about. So tell us a little bit about your new book.
Well, my new book is called Afternoons with Emily. It's published out of Ontario, Black Mouse Press. And, of course, the first thing people would, well, what's a monk writing about this Emily?
Yeah.
Who is Emily? Well, the secret is it's Emily Dickinson.
Right.
She's my love affair of the past few years.
Yeah, well, mine too.
Good. We're soulmates then.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess the point I wanted to ask you about, first of all, is that you and I have talked mostly through emails and distant correspondences about the importance of silence to both a poet, a person like myself, contemplatives, and now I hear from you, Emily. So tell us a little bit about her love of and need, I think, of silence.
Well, of course, silence is very essential to the monastic life. I mean,
Right.
The Trappist life is a life of silence,
right,
in which you can, pursue the life of prayer. And when I started reading Emily Dickinson, I found that she's like a monk.
Exactly.
I mean, she has this line, I'm nobody, who are you? Are you nobody too?
Exactly.
Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell, they'll advertise,
Yeah.
I thought, well, she talks like a monk.
Yeah, she talks like a monk, and she has a very lucid perception into the very nature of things. And I'm wondering if you wrote poetry as a kind of tip of the hat to her. Do you have a little illustration for us, or something that you particularly like?
Well, I certainly, in this book, I was memorizing her poetry as I went through the book, her collection, the entire collection, and now and then, there's something I would see and I say, oh, I just have to have this.
Yes.
So I start working on it, and I like to walk in the woods and over the knobs. We call our hills knobs.
Yeah.
And as I was going, and I would recite out loud what I was trying to memorize. And, of course, that etches it deeper into the memory.
It does.
So she was my walking companion, and that's where the afternoons come from. So I was really in the process of learning her poetry. It was shaping my own.
I see. So she's been a true companion and a muse and an influence in a way.
Well, and a soul sister.
Exactly. That's
so you asked for an example?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, well, here's something that might, because, first of all, there's rhyme in it.
Right.
And a regular meter. So, and that's characteristic of much of her poetry. I don't always write that way. It's called Cricket's Reverie. Summer now gone, cricket's slow reverie lingers on memory of summer's song. less need be said when things we said we'd do were proved at last so few. Dreams left for dead. Trees stand like harps, strings bare just to the tops where golden notes hang caught as song departs.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
And so full of imagery and color and light as far as the hearing brings it in, if you know what I mean. That's wonderful. And I want to ask you something. It's a related question, and it has to do with solitude and the idea that I hear from people who want to live a more contemplative life, a more creative inner life, but they feel guilty about the solitude, and then they'll very often say to me, well, I carry my solitude with me. Can you talk a little bit, if you will, about your own take on that, or anything that came across when you were studying and walking with Emily?
It's a problem that any monk is going to encounter somewhere as he enters into the monastic life, and, you know, am I abandoning the world in the wrong way? Mm-hmm. And, of course, you know, there's, here we stand as a city on the hill. It's like collectively together we are a witness. We don't have to be individual witnesses. Right. But then there's a deeper issue, and that is one's own generativity. Simply by keeping my mouth shut, am I not neglecting something essential to maturity, and that is one's own generativity?
Right, right.
And I think poetry and writing is a way of fulfilling that.
I think it is. I think almost anything that we do that is an aspect of the way we're called into being. Mm-hmm. Now, this term generativity was originally, I believe, Erik Erikson, the psychiatrist's term, yes, about how we give to others in our later years. Mm-hmm. And this idea of giving through what we have to offer, yes, you know, it's like Paul said, silver and gold have I none, but I give you what I have, when someone asked him for healing. Well, this is my experience as well, that we live as we were born to live, whether it's largely silent and solitary or in the midst of a bustling family, yes, and we just give that. So, you answer it beautifully, really. I appreciate it so much. And I appreciate your perspective because it's, for one thing, it's my perspective, but it also is, you live it every day.
Yes, but I think one of the essential things is to be detached from the results. Mm-hmm. You just are who you are, and exactly, with that as your gift, but you don't look for results. So even writing, mm-hmm, Emily Dickinson did not publish in her own time.
Right.
And I think perhaps one of the best studies in generativity is the story of Abraham, who was willing to sacrifice Isaac. This was the future for him. This was his generativity, right, and he was willing just to let it go into blood and flame, right, if the Lord so willed.
But, of course, he had the promise, he had the word that, yes, his seed would save the world. So he was looking forward in, yes, a way, through his faith. And that's what we have. We look forward through our faith. Through the eyes of faith. Mm-hmm.
Faith is the openness to both receive and to let go. Exactly.
I find the letting go part tantalizing and easier the older I get. I don't know if that's been your experience.
Yes, I think so.
Mm-hmm. Well, give us another snippet of Emily. Your take on Emily.
Oh, well.
Or anything as she walks with you.
The poem that most impressed me and really knocked my head off and made me say to myself, this gal I have to read because it seems so mystical. Mm-hmm. And it goes like this. He fumbles at your soul like players at the keys. Before they put full music on, he stuns you by degrees, prepares your brittle nature for that ethereal blow with fainter hammers further heard, then nearer, then so slow your blood has time to straighten, your brain to bubble cool. Deals one imperial thunderbolt that scalps your naked soul. When winds take forests in their paws, the universe is still.
That's gorgeous. That's beautiful. When you're walking, let's go back to that bit about walking, because very often when I'm walking, and I live in the woods as well, I have a little cabin here in Northern
Lucky
California. I've written about some of this. And when I'm walking in the woods, I like to work with Scripture, and that's the way I memorize Scripture. So I think you and I are aligned in that process.
Yes.
There's something to be meditated on, and there's something that you want to learn, and it's easier somehow when you're out in the woods.
Uh-huh.
But very often I find it easier to memorize when I'm actually indoors sitting. And I'm wondering if you have that same experience where the woods are so beautiful that it takes you away from the memory, memory
yes.
work.
I think it has to start very subtle and interior, indoors, just one line at a time in your mind, and then perhaps you can say it to yourself out loud, and then the next stage is to be able to say it in front of somebody else. Now that's really...
that's hard.
Yeah, that's hard. And then to be able to say it out loud as you're walking through the woods.
Yes, I find the latter is probably the hardest one, which is why a walking meditation, which I believe that is so... it's restorative. I find it extremely restorative. You simply cannot think about other things when you're working in this fashion.
Yes.
And I remember once a young businesswoman had come to me. She was so stressed, and I had suggested to her, she was very athletic, and so I thought, well, as she's walking, she can find a line of Scripture, and she found a line from Isaiah, thine ears shall hear a word behind thee saying, this is the way.
Oh, yes.
And it was easy enough for her, and she did work with it. She worked with it for months. Not that she was memorizing it for months, but she just walked that way. And do you know that her stress level completely changed?
Wow.
It went away, basically went away.
Very therapeutic.
Very therapeutic. So it's a wonderful thing. Well, what else? Tell us something more about what you discovered as you worked with Emily and your own poetry.
Well, I should add Rainer Rilke was also a influence in this book. Mm-hmm. And, of course, he's another writer of solitude, another poet of solitude. I was intrigued. Of course, Thomas Merton, my novice master, was a poet of solitude.
Yes.
And so there's a number of such out there, and I'm intrigued by these characters. So I went through a Rilke period and did some translations. The book contains, I think, 11 translations I did from either the German, I don't know German, but I can use the dictionary, and then the French.
Yes.
And I would investigate and figure out there's some things that have to be said that's not said in existing translations. Here's an example. If you sing of a God, it responds with its silence. None can approach a God that is other than silent. This invisible trade, making you to tremble, is inheritance made not for you, but for an angel.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm just amazed that the way you write is so accessible to you, and then so accessible to the other that it's like music, which is a mysterious, wonderful gift, where these notes communicate something special to each who listens in their own way.
And
so,
I always compose writing. I revise by reading something out loud, and if it doesn't sound musical, something's wrong.
Exactly, yes. And just as a matter of curiosity, how much revision do you do? Do you do a lot, or do you find that once you've written something, it flows musically?
Well, the more mature I get in my writing, the more revision I do.
Yeah, I'm relieved and grateful to hear that. I spend most of my time rewriting. In fact, that's what I call myself, as a rewriter. Well, I think we've probably come to the end of our conversation, so I want to thank you so much for your time. I know that you're very busy. What, if I may ask, what else do you do at the monastery besides walk in the woods and write poetry? I know you're very busy.
Well, I cook. That's my main job.
Well,
so I'll probably spend 4 hours cooking every day.
Yeah, that's one of my vocations, is cooking. So, but I don't have to do it. So I think when you have to do it, it can take some of the charm out of it. But,
yes, well, I've got 120 people to feed, so I have to do it.
You have to do it. Well, I know they're grateful for you. So, well, I thank you again. We'll be in touch, and God bless.